You know, the thing that a lot of us do think out loud often is what happens after Tuesday, what happens beyond Tuesday, regardless, win or lose. And we hope win, but if not, what then? And, you know, we've been through some of those down times where the election doesn't turn out the way we hope. And I think it frustrates and depresses a lot of people, particularly conservatives. There's an organization out there I wanted you to know about called the Conservative Caucus. If you don't, they've been around for actually quite a while. The conservativecaucus.org is their website. The president of the Conservative Caucus, Jim Pfaff, is with us this morning. And Jim, first of all, I welcome you to the show.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Yours is one that I think is more of a 30,000-foot view of an organization, and that's kind of why I set it up the way I did, because I think the organization is based in something bigger than any one election cycle. Is that fair?
Oh, yeah, that's absolutely true, because we're looking at advancing a conservative constitutionalist agenda and trying to inform the American public and people in the states where we operate, how they can be most effective to advance that agenda and understand it well.
And when we're talking about that, we're talking about not just sometimes obviously left-wing Democrats, but sometimes even the Republican Party needs the reminder of what conservatism really is.
Without a doubt. Honestly, I spent 10 years working on Capitol Hill as the chief of staff for a couple different members of Congress. I've watched it from the inside, and the Republican Party in the main does a very poor job of dealing with how to advance the principles that they have always outlined in their platform and the basic principles of conservatism, rooted in the Reagan idea of conservatism. They tend to give in to Democrats from the leadership level, and they tend to fight against their rank and file members of Congress that are trying to assert that agenda. So no, we generally fall on that side of the political spectrum and game that's happening out there. But you will definitely find us being highly critical of Republicans as necessary, because our goal is to advance the American ideal that we believe is well founded in the Constitution and, again, as I say, generally in conservative principles.
Jim, it's a tough one, because I hear often from, conservatives. I'm a conservative. At least I identify as a conservative. And I know that back in 2016, for instance, I made a huge point to die on the hill of Donald Trump is no conservative. Ted Cruz is the real conservative. And, he's the guy that we should support if you really want constitutional conservatism. Then Trump wins, and I have to say that he governed in a more conservative way. I mean, I'm not quite fit. I'm 47 years old, so I wasn't able to vote for Reagan. I was alive. So all I have is a frame of reference from what I read, and certainly not in my lifetime have I seen anybody who was mostly a Democrat for most of his life govern more conservatively than Donald Trump, for the most part. I'm set spending aside, I guess. Is that a fair assessment? Is that your read at the Conservative Caucus of his first term?
I think so. I, like you, was supporting Ted Cruz. Now, I did have the fortune of my very first vote for president was in 1984 for Ronald Reagan. And I was imbibed in the whole Reagan ideal. In fact, I was 11 years old in 1976 and in tears when he lost the nomination as an 11-year-old. So I really injected myself deeply into that whole scenario. And what is interesting is, having supported Cruz, I told people at the time who were Cruz supporters who, like you and me, had some questions about how conservatively he might govern. I still told people, if this guy becomes president, he's going to kick over the trash cans in Washington, D.C. and reveal how really bad it is. I mean, everyone has always known that Washington, D.C. is bad. But Donald Trump actually did fulfill that prophecy, if you want to so call it, that I made. And I'm glad that he did, because, there's a combination of faithfulness to conservative principles and the ability to work in the political system in such a manner as to shake the system up and get it realigned where it needs to go. Donald Trump has done that. But recently, just to hit on this Reagan point, I've been telling people Donald Trump actually is returning the party more to the Reagan ideals. And people get shocked because of the fact that there are still those, particularly younger people, younger than you and me, who don't really have a good concept of Reagan. There's a lot of negativity on him because they look at the fact that he didn't get everything done conservatively that he wanted to. But in reality, since Ronald Reagan, through George H.W. Bush and Bob Dole and George W. Bush and Mitt Romney and John McCain, all those people were not Reagan conservatives. They were big government so-called conservatives who really saw a role for government in society, whereas our Constitution really does not give government much of a role at all if we were to follow it faithfully. Donald Trump is pushing us back toward that direction all the way to the point where this year, look at what we're talking about. He's mentioned an elimination of the income tax. I don't know if he'll get it done, but that's what he's talking about. The reinstitution of tariffs as a means for revenue, but also as a means to hold other countries accountable to us in their trade. And that we were actually on that system until 1913 in this country. And it actually worked very, very well. We were a highly prosperous nation. We weren't as big as we are now in world economy, but we were very, very dynamic at the time. And then we are seeing the reductions of regulations that he's pushed, which is absolutely consistent with Ronald Reagan. And in both Reagan's economy and Trump's economy when he was president, regulation was probably the key factor, even though tax cuts and monetary policy played a role in that in that economic positivity. It was regulation that really made it happen, and both Reagan and Trump were big on the idea of reducing government regulation.
Jim Pfaff is with us. He's the president of the Conservative Caucus, theconservativecaucus.org. In places like Pennsylvania, particularly the Southeast, we only have one Republican representing the area. His name is Brian Fitzpatrick, and I think a lot of conservatives certainly have frustrations with Representative Fitzpatrick a lot of times on certain issues. I'll leave it at that. But, you know, as is the case with so many other states that are outside the population centers, they're oftentimes ruby red and full of really principled conservatives for the most part. Republicans that get closer to cities get softer on conservatism, don't they?
They tend to. And one of Brian Fitzpatrick's former chiefs of staff was a really good friend of mine. And I have the same vagueness in my response to him. I mean, he's, I guess, a generally good guy. But you are right. What he and many other Republicans get caught up in is this supposed suburban problem. You know, I got to be careful because, you know, the women in the area want to support abortion or whatever, social, all these kind of things that they throw in to cloud up the issue. And I'm convinced that when you assert conservative principles strongly, even in areas like that, you can be a successful Republican member. But, you know, Pennsylvania is actually a wonderful place. I love Pennsylvania. But one of the interesting things that those of us who've worked in politics for many years talk about to describe Pennsylvania is that Pennsylvania is Philadelphia and Pittsburgh surrounded by Alabama. And there's a whole lot of truth to that. And guys like Brian Fitzpatrick could take the Scott Perry approach, who is a friend of mine and a wonderful Pennsylvania representative. They could take that approach and I think be very successful. The Republican Party could control everything and even get the hearts and minds of Americans if they would just advance the constitutional conservative ideals. And I think we're going to find in this election with Donald Trump that is actually going to work because that is the message that Donald Trump is promoting.
Yeah, I'm heartsick when I think that in the not too recent past, Pennsylvania had a Republican governor and a Republican legislature and a Republican senator, United States senator. There was a real opportunity in, you know, the early 2010s for Republicans to fix Pennsylvania like Ron DeSantis and many Republicans have fixed Florida and take it out of purple and lock it up and solidify it. And instead, you had Republicans in Pennsylvania give us Act 77, which has given us this mail-in voting mess. And I would argue made things worse. It's a frustrating thing to watch Republicans in Pennsylvania because there is a difference. There's a distinct difference in what Republicans call themselves in terms of conservatives versus whatever else they are. I mean, it's a real issue here.
Yeah, it is. And by the way, even though we have to deal with mail voting during this election. We really need to move away from it. It is not a secure way to do elections at all. There's so much, not just like fraud on the margins potentially. That's always a risk in every election with mail ballots or using the traditional thing that you and I grew up with when we were voting. But that's a big issue. But what's really interesting is you talk about there were once two Republican senators, Pat Toomey and Rick Santorum, at the same time. And, Rick Santorum did get all this. Rick Santorum, by the way, in some measures, I'll give him a fair shake on this. He was Trump on a policy agenda before Trump in many ways, and a fantastic conservative. Pat Toomey, who had been a wonderful conservative, founder of the Club for Growth, a very economically conservative group, he ended up, honestly, just leaving the reservation to the point where he's now supporting Kamala Harris. It's really a travesty because there was a real opportunity for Pennsylvania to get aligned where it needed to go. And again, and I think I believe this from afar. I've never been a Pennsylvanian. You understand it, I'm sure, being a Pennsylvanian. Those suburbs in both Pittsburgh and Philadelphia really do resonate with conservative ideals if we're only willing to press them. I think the biggest problem with those areas, the out counties from Philadelphia in particular, they really do resonate with conservative ideals. It's a place where there's a business economy that can be very strong. There's a lot of entrepreneurial effort that happens all over Pittsburgh, but certainly in the suburbs of Philadelphia. That could be reasserted and could drive a wonderful change for the state that can bring real prosperity if we were only willing to do that again as a party.
Yeah, I hope, and I know you do at the Conservative Caucus, Jim. I've been pounding this a lot this week. Every 4 years, we all get very animated about presidential elections and congressional elections and, Senate and House races. And that's all fine. That's good. That's important. But what we don't, as conservatives, do very well organizationally is what Democrats love to do, and that's get down in the weeds, granular. I mean, they take over our school boards. They take over our county commissions. They take over our legislatures. They run hard in all the little places that impact us, I would argue, the most closely on the ground every day.
Well, what's very interesting, go back to the whole Pennsylvania issue in general. I mean, you've had Republican legislatures. It's not too far in the past when there have been Republican governors. If there was consistency all the way from the federal down to the state level, there can always be good things to happen. I do find it interesting that Josh Shapiro has to make an attempt. I think it's a fake one, but he has to make an attempt to try to seem reasonable and conservative in approach. This is how Democrats can break through to Republicans sometimes, is they have a conservative approach. They seem reasonable and rational in how they say things. And I give
Look what Fetterman's doing. Look what Fetterman's doing, Jim.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And Fetterman knows what's at risk, by the way. He apparently has got his mind back now suddenly, but it's still a leftist mind, but he can actually talk now. But he really does know he has to make at least some bow to the Trump base to be able to remain. And that's why on immigration issues and so forth, he is kind of broken from the reservation. But all that proves is that if Republicans would just be Republicans, or at least what they claim Republicans are, then they can have great success even in Pennsylvania. I'm convinced Pennsylvania is roughly a very conservative state. It's only in the inner cities and also in Harrisburg where you get this radical leftist way of thinking. The vast majority of Pennsylvanians really believe the things that you and I believe and that we know are important for a prosperous society.
Yeah, I think Pennsylvania can be locked up like Ohio and Florida with the proper focus on the ground. I agree with you completely. If the folks listening want to know more or get involved with the Conservative Caucus, Jim, is there a way people can do that individually?
Surely. I would have them go, as you've already given the website, but I'll repeat it, theconservativecaucus.org. Now, what they can do there is on the banner that shows up on the website, we've got various links to important things. Right now, we're talking about the 16 reasons why people need to vote for Donald Trump. We're spending in the aggregate around the country right now about $8 million, including in Pennsylvania, to help in independent expenditures to help get Trump elected. But at the top right, if people would just log in there and set up an account, you're going to have a treasure trove of information that is going to help you be effective in your local area, whether it's your school board or your city council or in state legislative issues as well, too. And we have means and tools for you to learn how to be an effective grassroots operator. We are a grassroots organization. We've got some degree of organization in 39 states this next election cycle. We're going to expand that out quickly to 50 states. We were once there some years ago. And when I came on board, we're refocusing this now. It's in the grassroots that we win this country, and it's in being honest about what's taking place. We have the tools to help people learn how to use the tools that win so that they can advance the agenda that they care about.
I love that. And communicate it. You know, a lot of people, that's what Reagan was, the great communicator. Trump connects and communicates. How to communicate that message, too, is so important. Jim Pfaff, president of the Conservative Caucus, theconservativecaucus.org. Great to make your acquaintance, Jim. I hope you'll come back.
I look forward to. Please do bring me back. I enjoy Pennsylvania. I love Pennsylvanians. And I think that there's a real chance for something great to happen in the future, particularly when Trump gets elected on Tuesday, or so I predict at this point.
Aha, knock wood. Thank you, Jim.
Thanks so much.